prototype. Freelance, man. Now, as we count these rivets, we learn that, what's a rivet, dude? Prototype modeling, freelancing, or somewhere in between. Choosing your type of model railroading on Ron's Trains and Things right now. Hi, I'm Ron of Ron's Trains and Things, and if you'd like to see more model railroad tips, tools, and techniques, then be sure and subscribe down below and click the little bell icon so you can catch future videos. I don't know how long the debate between prototype modeling and freelancing has been going on within the model railroad community, but I suspect it's been going on almost as long as the hobby has existed. It's been a debate between modelers for as long as I've been in the hobby and as far back as I've been able to read. The question rages as to which is best. Modeling strictly adhering to a prototype, its look, its era, its standards, or doing something completely out of your imagination, a completely freelanced model railroad in which you can do whatever you want. Well, today I want to talk about both the pros and cons of both prototype and freelance modeling and some of my personal perspective on the debate. But before I even begin the topic, let me say this. I want to answer the question as to which is best, prototype or freelance modeling. The answer to that question is neither one is best. Some people really enjoy doing prototype modeling and recreating exact things as they are or were in the real world. Other people really enjoy doing something that is more creative and out of their own imagination. The fact of the matter is, model railroading is a hobby. It's meant to be a pastime. It's meant to give us a sense of satisfaction. It's meant to be fun. So the answer as to which is best is a very personal answer to a very personal question. And the truth of the matter is, whichever one you most enjoy, whichever one most brings you that sense of fun and satisfaction, that is the answer that is best for you. In fact, we see that over time, many model railroaders will switch from one type of model railroading to another. Perhaps one of the most notable instances of this is Tony Custer. Years ago, Tony Custer was a fantastic model railroader who was doing freelance model railroading with his Allegheny Midland, very famous railroad that many people came to know and love. Then, several years back, Tony tore down the Allegheny Midland, moved to a new house, switched from freelance model railroading to prototype model railroading of the railroad that he remembered as a child, the Nickel Plate Road, St. Louis Division. So you see, that was a major switch for Tony from freelance to prototype, and many of us make switches like that over the course of time as well. So what are the advantages, the disadvantages, the pros and cons of prototype versus freelance model railroading? Well, when it comes to prototype railroading, the advantages are the fact that you have the blueprints for what you want right in front of you in the real world. You don't have to use a lot of imagination. You don't have to make up a lot of things out of your mind. You just go and look and see what existed in the real world, and then you model that thing. So you look at the structures that existed in a particular time in a particular area. You look at the locomotives, the rolling stock. You look at the scenery as it was in that time, and you recreate that on your layout. A prototype modeling can become very specific and very detailed. If we're modeling a prototype, we're certainly probably thinking about a particular road or maybe a couple of roads as they interacted with one another. We're probably looking at a particular place, a region, a city, a particular location. We're also probably talking about a particular era, a particular time period. In fact, some go so far as to model one specific day in history on the railroad of their choice. Now, some of the disadvantages that go along with prototype model railroading is unless you are modeling today specifically, then you may have to go back and find photographs of structures, of locations, of scenery, of locomotives and rolling stock as they were in the particular time and the particular era that you model. The further back that era is, the more difficult some of those photographs can be to find. You see often, and you read often in magazines, on forums, even here on YouTube, about people who are researching and researching and researching, trying to find photographs of that particular key structure that they need for their layout, or of a particular piece of rolling stock or locomotive that they want to include on their prototype layout. So finding those exact details can be difficult. Also, if we're prototype modeling, we need to be able to have very close to exact replicas of structures. In most cases, those aren't going to exist in kits or in built-up structures, which means we're going to have to do a lot of kit bashing and scratch building in order to get those key structures that help us to build a prototype railroad. Now, on the other end of this debate is freelance model railroading. Taken to its logical conclusion, freelance model railroading is a complete expression of our own imagination. We can make up our own railroad, we can make up our own locations, our own times, we can even mix eras and locations if we want to. The whole concept of freelancing is the fact that we can do whatever we want. Now, for most of us, that may mean that we take a prototype railroad but make up our own locations and our own eras. Or it may mean that we take some items, some structures from one location and some others from another location, and some that we completely make up on our own and just bring them together in a way that we want the railroad to look. One of the advantages of freelance model railroading is the fact that we can use any structures, any locomotives, any rolling stock that we want, as long as it fits in with our goals and desires for the railroad. That means that any kit that's out there that we happen to like, we could put that on our railroad, any rolling stock, any locomotive. We only have to scratch build or kit bash those items that we want to in order to make what we want for our layout. The primary disadvantage to freelance model railroading is the fact that we are limited by whatever our imagination tells us, which ultimately means that probably along the line we're looking somewhere at the real world to see what does a location look like, how does an industry work, how do I make this thing flow together to work something like a railroad. Another disadvantage to true freelance model railroading is if we are making a freelance railroad, that is a railroad that never existed, that means that while we may not be scratch building or kit bashing as many structures, we do have to paint and decal our unique locomotives and rolling stock for that fictional layout. That can include a lot of work and take a lot of time as well. Now, we see debates about prototype versus freelance as if this is an either-or kind of a situation. Either you're a prototype model railroader or you're a freelance model railroader. The fact of the matter is, this is not a black and white discussion. It's really not an either-or. It's a continuum. It's a spectrum. From one extreme of prototype to another extreme of freelance, most of us fall somewhere in between. The fact of the matter is, if we were really honest with ourselves, there probably is no such thing as fully true and pure prototype railroading. There's also probably no such thing as fully pure and true freelance model railroading. Because on the prototype side, no matter how prototypical we try to be, somewhere along the line, we have to make some compromises as we try to bring the real world down to size for a model railroad layout. On the other end of the spectrum, as much as we try to be creative and try to do unique things in model railroading, ultimately we are still mimicking some things that come from the true world. The truth is, most of us, honestly, are some level of protolancers. That is, most of us will model after a real railroad and use a real railroad name or some real railroad names. Most of us will use locomotives and rolling stock as they are produced by the model railroad manufacturing community, and those are things that existed in the real world. Most of us will copy some things out of the real world. The question is how true we try to be to a particular location and era, or how much do we just feel free to mix and mingle these things as we desire. I want to give you an example of proto-lance railroading from my particular layout. Now, I am striving to reproduce a prototype railroad in a particular real-world era and location, but I'm not a strict prototype railroader. Let me give you some examples. In the various locations on my layout, I try to represent those real locations with certain key or signature structures that make the connection with that particular location. For example, in North Yard, the yard tower as well as the maintenance facility that I have modeled in North Yard are very close facsimiles of the actual yard tower and office and maintenance facilities as they existed in North Yard in the early 2000s. Now, if we look at photographs today, we'll see that the engine facilities as well as the repair in place tracks and the structures around those have changed drastically. So that's one way in which I'm remaining true not only to the location but also to the era of North Yard. On the other hand, many of the industries along North Yard, while they are representing real industries, are not all that close as far as looking like the actual industries of the time. And in fact, I've got one structure that is just completely a creation of my own as it exists on the back of North Yard. If we move up to Wichita Falls on the upper deck of my layout, if you've seen the videos from about a year ago, you saw how I kit bashed the Holt Hotel, which is a key signature structure in downtown Wichita Falls, very near the tracks, very visible. That's a key identifying structure for Wichita Falls. Many of the other structures for Wichita Falls are, again, simply stand-ins for structures that are there or are completely just creations of my own. When we come to the mountain part of my layout, as you see behind me, that part of my layout is completely fictional. The line that I model doesn't go through this type of mountain scenery. In fact, it goes through southern Colorado, northern New Mexico, a much more high desert kind of scenery. But this kind of Central Rockies mountain scenery is what I wanted to create. So that was my version of freelancing on my protolanced layout. Now, as you build your own layout, as you do your model railroading, you get to choose. How much do I want to follow a prototype? How much do I want to freelance? How much do I want to create for myself? How much do I want to just use what's commercially available? Do I want to choose a particular era? Do I want to mix those things up? Ultimately, the real question is, what is going to provide me with the most fun and the most satisfaction? The answer to that question is the answer to what is best for you. So I encourage you to do what is fun, what brings you satisfaction. That's the type of model railroading that'll be best for you. If you enjoyed this video about prototype versus freelance model railroading, well, here's a link to some more videos that I know you're going to enjoy as well. I hope you'll check those out. Also, take a moment to look in the description down below where you're going to find links to my Amazon page and my Amazon Pick of the Week, my Patreon page, and places where you can connect with me on social media. Well, I hope you'll come back and join me again each Tuesday as I bring you more great model railroad videos, and I look forward to seeing you then. Lizzie?